I'm here today with our good friend Jennifer Grant. Jennifer is the author of 6 books for adults, including Love You More, The Divine Surprise of Adopting My Daughter. Her latest evening reflections on nature is called Dimming the Day and released in October 2021. It was named one of the top spiritual books of 2021 by Spirituality and Practice. So congratulations, Jen.
Thank you.
Jennifer also writes for children. Her picture book, Maybe God is Like That Too, won a gold medal from the Moonbeam Spirit Awards for excellence in children's literature and was named a Book of the Year finalist in the Forward Indies Award. Her second picture book, Maybe I Can Love My Neighbor Too, has been named a Junior Library Guild official gold standard selection. Her other children's books are A Little Blue Bottle and Once Upon a Time Not So Long Ago, which is a picture book about the pandemic. Her new book is Sing, Wrestle, Spin, which is just about to release. Jen has written for publications including Women's Day, Chicago Parent, and Pathos. For more than a decade, she wrote features, restaurant profiles, and general interest columns for the Sun-Times media newspapers. She was also a health and family columnist for the Chicago Tribune. Jen also curates the Faith and Food page for CompassionateChristianity.org. And I should also mention that Jen is contributing a chapter to the new How to Heal Our Divides book that will be releasing in May. Jen divides her time among many things, her own creative work, and also work as an editor and editorial consultant. She also speaks at many different writers' conferences and retreats, including, of course, Writing for Your Life. Speaking of which, Jen will be one of our featured speakers at our upcoming Dig Deeper online writers' conference in May. You can learn more about Jen at jennifergrant.com. So Jen, as always, it is so wonderful to talk with you about yet another new book that you're
Thank you,
coming out
Brian.
with. You've been incredibly productive on multiple fronts. So congratulations on all the wonderful things you've
Thank you.
accomplished.
Thank you.
So before we get into, the new book, I'd love for you to tell people more about, kind of your background that I briefly
hmm
went through.
Yeah, well, I've always been a writer and a reader. I was asked recently when I started writing, and the first thing that popped into my head was sitting in the basement of my house growing up with stacks of notebook paper and writing stories. And so I've been writing as long as I can remember. And then in college, I studied English, and then I got my master's degree in English and creative writing. And then I've held a number of jobs over the years as a writer. So I've worked for nonprofits in communications and in writing things like annual reports and project reports and donor reports for nonprofits. And obviously, I've worked as a journalist for the Chicago Tribune and some other papers in the Chicago area. And I wrote features, and that was a lot of fun, actually, because I could, with the smaller papers, if I learned about a new business or I heard about someone interesting in the community, I could just always pitch these stories. And so it made me feel really connected to my community and to know, to be able to follow how businesses were changing or trends that were happening. And it was really an interesting process. So I worked as a columnist and also writing feature stories for about 12 or 13 years. And one of the columns that I wrote was actually about adoption. And so for about a year and a half of that time, I was writing about international adoption specifically because I was in the process of adopting my daughter. And there were a lot of people in my area who also had adopted internationally. And so there's a lot of interest in that. So I was able to tell other people's stories and hear about some of the challenges that parents had and so on. And from that, my first book really was I used some of those old columns as a springboard for writing this memoir about adoption, which told the story of how my husband and I, as parents of 3 little kids, decided to adopt, and kind of that whole process. And also, I mean, one thing that I did in that book that I'm glad I did was I did a lot of research around the ethics of international adoption, which obviously it's a tricky issue. And so I was able to interview other adoptive parents and also advocates for birth families and a wealth of voices kind of contributed to that book as well. So from then on, I stopped doing newspaper work and I started writing book length works and wrote a few books about parenting and family life, and some other books that are more in the realm of spirituality and looking at progressive Christian faith, looking at people's relationship with the Bible. So the book Disquiet Time that I co-edited with my friend Kathleen Falsani, who's a wonderful journalist and religion writer. But that book, we invited more than 40 people to contribute their voices and to tell their stories of their relationship with a verse or passage in the Bible. And what we got was quite a mix of responses. Some people really railing against a verse that they hate, other people talking about a passage in scripture that is a great comfort to them. And so I really love that book because we really attempted, and I think we succeeded in asking people from all over the faith world. I mean, there are also Jewish people who contributed. There's people of different religions, but it's primarily people in the Christian faith, but all over the map, politically and theologically. And so,
I think you may know this already. I'm not sure. When I very first started the idea of doing How to Heal Our Divides, the first book I looked at as a model was Disquiet Time.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I knew the book, because I think we talked about it and maybe done an interview. I don't remember, but I knew about it and I had a copy and I said, okay, let's see how Jen and Kathleen put that all together. So that was a great model for me to learn from.
Oh, that's so fun. Oh, no, I didn't know that. That's great. Well, I'm glad that it had that kind of generative effect on your work. So all my books in more recent years, like Dimming the Day is a book of kind of evening reflections, as you mentioned. And it's kind of a meditative book to help people kind of unplug and relax at the end of the day and reflect on topics in nature. And I'm actually currently working on a book. So Dimming the Day was published by Broadleaf Books. And that's another imprint in that company is Beaming Books, who did the Maybe books for me. And I'm working on a book now I'm in edits on a book for Beaming Books, which is a little bit like Dimming the Day in that it's reflections on nature. But this new book will be out spring of 2023, and it's called Finding Calm in Nature. And so it's each chapter, again, like Dimming the Day, has a topic from nature, a certain tree or bird or thing. And in that book, I'm sort of trying to show kids how they can learn about these things, but also kind of use those things in nature as a model for their own thriving. So we look at dandelions in that book for kids, and then I talk about resilience and how to build resilience. And so, that's what is really keeping me busy right now.
Well, the other thing, I know that you do is a lot of editing, in a variety of modes, whether it's books or you're doing a lot of work for guideposts, right?
Yeah. I love that.
So how in the world do you juggle all these different things that,
Well, you're a person who also juggles a lot of different tasks. I think I have a very organized way to approach my work week. And so tasks like, and it's all based on sort of how I view my own like circadian rhythms, right? So in the mornings, I like to do things like editing or administrative stuff. And I do that kind of more left brainy kind of tasks. And I really love that. And I do feel like editing, and I just finished another volume for Guidepost. I just edited a 365 devotion for them. But that kind of work, it does sharpen one's skills as a writer as well, because, reading other people's work and seeing the shortcuts they take or seeing the mistakes they're making or seeing kind of places they could have dug deeper or sort of thought in a more complex way about something or stated something more simply helps me when I'm writing too, because then I have my little editor voice is reminding me what I've just learned in the morning. So yeah, in the afternoons it's more mistakes. Yeah, exactly. Well, and in the afternoon I do more sort of daydreamy work where I just need to be quiet and looking out the window and thinking up ideas and making all sorts of funny notes to myself about work that I would like to do in the future or that I'm working on at the moment. So I do sort of divide the kind of left and right brain work.
Well, good for you. I mean, people like me are only half. I only got a left brain. I don't have a right brain.
I don't know about
So
that.
I only know how to think, very pragmatically. But good for you for being able to context switch like that every day. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Or some days I just reserve for, if I'm finishing a big editing job or working with a client, Thursday will be that person's day or something like that. But
So let's talk about the new book, Sing, Wrestle, Spin. How did that come about? What was your motivation to do that?
Well, and here it is. And as I told you,
Yay.
it just arrived a few minutes ago, which is so fun. I hadn't held it in my hands until today. So this book is with Church Publishing and our friend Milton Brasher
Yes,
Cunningham.
yes.
And he actually talked to me some time ago about writing a book on prayer for children, and the intended readership, it's kids like ages 7 to 11-ish. And he was looking at their backlist at Church Publishing, and they have a number of books written for children about prayer. And he felt like it was time to have, an updated new voice talking about this. And so he asked me to come up with an idea. So one of those dreamy afternoons, I spent doodling and making notes. And I thought, what would be a good, relevant, timely book about prayer for kids and what kids are dealing with today? And I wrote this last year. So I was writing it when kids were obviously under a lot of stress in their lives with remote school or concerns about their family or finance or whatever. And so one thing I tried to do in this book is really dignify and honor the complex feelings that kids have, not only around their life situation, but around prayer. And what I didn't want to do is give kind of a tired message of, oh, well, just pray about it and trust God and everything will be fine. And I didn't also want to make it seem that kids don't have actual real concerns, and they do. And kids deal with death, that kids deal with so many losses, the loss of a pet, the loss of a grandparent, the loss of a parent, divorce, moving. These are all things that weigh heavily on kids' hearts. And so one thing I really tried to do in each of the chapters is to sort of name and acknowledge something difficult that a kid might be going through, because it's possible that someone will give this book to a child when they feel like the child needs kind of spiritual encouragement or is going through something. So each of the chapters is a different verb, much like the title, Sing, Wrestle, and Spin. First chapter is sing, and then sort of in the middle is wrestle, and the last chapter is spin. But some of the other chapters are touch, listen, laugh, question, count, petition, breathe, cry, taste. And so all of these are different ways that I suggest that kids can approach the divine and express their own prayers. And so every chapter describes, whatever the topic is, and then gives a sample prayer at the end that a child could use if they want. Another wonderful thing about this book is that once again, Jillian Whiting, who illustrated A Little Blue Bottle and Once Upon a Time Not So Long Ago, does all the interior art. So there's a lot
nice.
they're very simple kind of pen and ink kind of illustrations, but she's done that for us for this book. So yeah, my hope is that it will be a book that kids will feel invited to try different ways of praying, and also that kids of varying abilities can find it helpful. So, when I was growing up and praying was folding your hands and closing your eyes and sitting quietly, in this book, I'm saying, no, you can be angry. You can spin around in a chair to pray. You can sing. You can draw. You can taste something as a prayer. And so I really tried to keep at the forefront of my mind when I was writing it that a lot of different kids have different ways they express themselves. Some kids are nonverbal. Some kids are really tactile. Some kids, that will connect with prayer in totally different ways. So I'm hopeful that this variety of approaches to prayer will meet the needs of a lot of different kinds of kids.
Very cool. Well, the book description says it is a fresh and imaginative ways for kids to pray using all their senses. And, kind of as you just described a few of those. And it's like, I like the fact that it's not just intellectual and abstract, right? Which a lot of, religion kind of has been, and maybe needs to be, I'm not sure. But for kids to be able to make it much more tangible, and active, I just think is really, just makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh, thank you. Well, I hope it will. I hope it'll be helpful to kids. I had read before writing this book, I read Father James Martin's new book on prayer. And I think it's called How to Pray, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, that was also in my mind when I was writing this. And I actually kind of reference it in the end of the book because he says, I also wanted to acknowledge to kids who are reading this book that just because we pray for something, it doesn't mean it's going to happen or happen in the way that we expect it. And I didn't want to gloss over that and say, just trust and it's fine. So I really deal with unanswered prayer in this book as well. And in his book, How to Pray, Father James Martin says something like, I don't know how prayer works. I don't know what happens when we pray, but I believe that God is listening and God is with us. And so that's kind of the ultimate message that I give in this book, because of course we all pray for things and, beg God for relief from illness or to heal someone or to help us with things. And we don't see an answer, or the answer that we had asked for. So I also wanted to really underscore that and be honest about that with kids as well.
Wonderful. I mean, how many people have we talked to or heard from where they have to deconstruct something that they learned when they were young, right? And you just hit on one really good example of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. Because I think some of the toxic messages that kids are taught or that we were taught, and unfortunately kids are still being taught in some kinds of churches, are ones that people spend the rest of their lives either rejecting their faith or rejecting God or just feeling so confused, spiritually. And so, one of the things I love about writing these books for kids that on spiritual topics is I feel like at least the child who's given this book will not have some kind of message that will keep them up in the middle of the night when they're 30, or when they're 11. But I hope it will be an invitation for them to connect spiritually.
So I'd like to read a couple of the endorsements for the book. One from our mutual friend, Glennis Nellis.
Mm-hmm.
She says, inclusive, inviting, and thoroughly innovative, Jennifer Grant's Sing, Wrestle, Spin is a lovely invitation for children to explore myriad ways to pray. A gentle, creative exploration that will be welcomed by every family of faith. And this from another mutual friend, Tracy Smith. The ideas invite children to bring wonder, creativity, and play to the practice of prayer. I'll be recommending this book to every parent, Christian educator, and pastor I know. I particularly like a couple of words that they have used there. Inclusive, innovative, and creative. So can you talk a little bit about why you feel the book is described in those terms?
Well, inclusive, I wonder why, I didn't ask them why they wrote the endorsements they did. I'm very grateful for them. I think inclusive may be because, and it's a passion actually for Glennis and Tracy and so many of us who write for kids and who really want to not give toxic or unhelpful messages about God to kids. So I don't refer to God as he. It's not, there's not that element, which I think can be damaging for kids if they always think, a fatherless child. I actually had this experience as a kid where people would say, God is a loving father. And I grew up with a single mother and I didn't have a relationship with my father. And that definitely
Wow.
affected me spiritually.
Sure.
And so if, every time someone would say, yeah, God's, or even, people would give sermons on Abba Father, meaning daddy father. And I didn't use that. I didn't have a daddy, and so like I, what, I don't know if this is what they meant by inclusive, but I use different names for God in this that don't include that. Um, and there's also, I think I mentioned in this book, the importance of pronouns. It doesn't really have content related to like the LGBTQ community, but I do talk about the importance of language and of using pronouns that are the preferred pronouns that someone likes to use. And I kind of do it in the context of nature and what sort of mused about like what are nature's pronouns. But I did sort of reference that idea of one way to show respect to something or to someone is to use their proper pronouns. So it could be that also was helpful. Another thing in it, I did quite intentionally use they as instead of he or she. So like I use they as the singular pronoun. And I think that can be helpful too to a kid maybe who doesn't identify as a he or she, and they wouldn't feel like there's this binary and a child reading this is either a he or a she. Maybe there's going to be a 12-year-old kid reading this and who doesn't identify that way. And so that would be inclusive. They wouldn't feel left out of this discussion of prayer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in terms of creative, I mean, I did try to come up with, I don't know, the chapter count has to do with counting our prayers and even things like rosaries, the way we count beads in a rosary when you're praying. And that I really had in mind. And I'm a very tactile person, and that had the kind of tactile idea of, and then we do like 5-finger prayers in that chapter. But even things like, listening and being quiet, touching things. One of each chapter as well has a story from the Bible, and the touch chapter, and it's one of my favorite stories about Jesus, is when a group of people bring a woman who's been caught in adultery, and they say, can we stone her, I think. Anyway, Jesus's response is he kind of kneels down in the dirt and starts drawing something in the dirt. And so in the touch chapter, I relay that story because I wonder, it made me wonder, what was he writing in the dirt? And also just that tactile experience that he had of rubbing his hands in the dirt is something that kids will connect with as well. I mean, kids are always doing stuff like that,
For
right?
sure.
And yeah, I think that kind of simple, I could see, maybe a kid at a baseball game on this, sitting on the bench and playing with the dirt, and they could write a prayer. They could write the name of someone they're concerned about. They could write, hope I get a home run or whatever, but they could use that sort of drawing in the dirt like Jesus did as a way of forming a prayer. So I hope it's creative, and I definitely didn't want to repeat old ways of talking about God or old ways of talking about prayer, but I did want to, invite kids to use their different senses, use their different emotions. And it's not all sad. There's a chapter called Laugh as well. And I talked about, examples of Jesus having a sense of humor. And what I really found when I was doing the research for that is it seemed like Jesus's main, at least from what I could gather, and I'm not a theologian, as you know, but his sort of form of humor was maybe exaggeration, so things like, it's harder for a rich person to get into the kingdom of heaven than, a camel to get through the eye of a needle, all these kind of weird, exaggerated, funny things that he said as well. So, so one of the chapters is Laugh. So I didn't want it to be a very serious book that kids would feel like no sense of kind of play with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So would you say that the book is applicable for one age group to read it themselves and another age group that parents could read it to them?
Yeah, I think definitely. Like if a family had, a number of kids and, older ones, I think it could be read by young teens, tweens and teens, obviously by themselves if they're readers. But I think younger kids could listen as well. And um, that's part of the reason I was glad that they did decide to give interior illustrations, because obviously if a parent or someone is reading this to a younger kid, they'll have something to look at, and
Mhm,
something that'll
mhm.
keep their attention that way, um, while they're hearing the text itself. So yeah, so the assignment was, write a book for kids around 7 years old to 11 years old. But
Okay.
I think younger kids could have it read to them, or a young kid who's a great reader could read it earlier
Mhm,
than that.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. So what would be the one thing that you'd like kids or parents to take away from the book?
Um, I think, well, I like the idea that our prayers are so personal, that I start the book by saying, nobody sounds just like you, nobody looks just like you, and nobody prays just like you. Um, and no one's fingerprints are the same as yours. And so given that you are a unique person in the world, no one's prayers are like yours either. So you don't have to, as much as as a good Episcopalian, I love the liturgy and I love the prayer book, but I think there's such a wonderful place to make space for people to pray in all different ways, and not use the same words all the time, or not, there's not some right answer about how to pray. And
Mhm.
so I guess that's what I hope people will get, as they read it to their kids, or as kids read it, that whatever way they like to express themselves is an appropriate way to pray.
Cool. So earlier you talked about one of your upcoming books, the one that is kind of a children's version of Dimming the Day, roughly speaking. Do you have other books that you can talk about yet or not?
Yeah, well, actually, I think there will be two books coming out from Beaming Books in 2023. So that one, which is Finding Calm in Nature, which is very, nature nonfiction kind of meditative book. That book is actually not a Christian book, but I would say it's more like a meditative book. It has different, it doesn't have any Christian content, so it's appropriate for use at, I think they can imagine it being used like in a nature center or places like that where kids could, um, just have kind of a time of grounding. And then another book that is a picture book that's coming out in 2023 with Beaming Books. It has a working title, and I don't know whether it's going to be the title, but it's called Explaining God.
Hmm.
And it's about a little kid, just sort of saying God is hard to explain. And I was with some delightful little girls a couple summers ago who were staying with us. And the one girl she's a very cute, smart, quirky kid. And she decided like just to ask questions as instead of any statements. So if I said, would you like something to eat? She'd say, did you know that I love apples, or, something like that. And I kind of had this voice in my head after spending a lot of time with this little girl. And I wrote a draft of that book. And then, so that one, yeah, that will be
Oh, that's
out
funny.
next year. Yeah.
That's
So it's a little quirky. It's like a
that's
quirky
unique
voice.
though. That's
Yeah.
cool. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What about on the
Yeah.
adult side? Do you do anything near term or?
No, not really. I mean, um, right now I'm doing edits for Finding Calm in Nature, and obviously doing a little promotional things for this. Um, the project that I'm working on when I have time, that will be for adults, is I have been working on a novel. And so
Oh my.
so I've been kind of reserving some time every week to work on that as well.
Hmm.
And that's sort of me being tired of myself always saying, oh yeah, but I've got a novel idea. I really want to write this novel. So I'm finally actually during this calendar year doing it. So,
Wow. Well, that's a
you
big
know,
departure.
yeah, although I mean, I've written a lot of fiction in the past, but then I kind of got off on a detour with the memoir and other nonfiction writing.
Hmm. Hmm. So just shifting gears a little bit, I mentioned earlier that you're going to be one of our featured speakers at our online Dig Deeper conference in May. You want to
Hmm.
give folks a little bit of a preview about what you'll be
Yeah,
presenting then?
you bet. I'm actually I'm really excited about this. It's I'm sharing I did a little mini workshop on this years and years ago, but the topic of my workshop for that is best practices when you're self-editing. And you can be your own best first editor. And I think really it's been born of when I did Disquiet Time, and then also all this editing I've been doing for the past few years with guideposts and also with just individual clients. There are some best practices that people can just do that will elevate and make their writing stronger. And once they know that, once they can kind of even have, I mean, I will have, me, when I do these conferences, I love to give everybody kind of a cheat sheet. So
Yeah,
when the
sure.
session is over, they can kind of tack up this thing on their bulletin board or something. But there are definitely things that we can do. We'll talk about the crutch words we use as writers. For instance, whenever I'm finishing a manuscript, I do a search for the word little or little bit. And that's a way that I weaken my writing, is that when I'm writing, sometimes I'll say, well, I felt a little bit this, or it was a little like that. And that word really disempowers the sentence. And
Hmm,
so
hmm.
one of the ways that I self-edit is do a search for that word and take it out. um, Taking out words like very or really or totally or all those kind of words. Another one. Um, I'm always getting on one of my daughters who is in college, and she sometimes has me glance over her work before she submits a paper. She has a habit of she's a public health major, writes these, very interesting and solid, well-researched papers, but she has her crutch word, or her habit is she'll say, you know, and it can cause disease, illness, and more. And so she
And
has the and
more.
more. And so whenever I'm helping her, I say, let's do a search on and more, because that's the way she sort of weakens her writing, so by getting rid of that. So we'll talk about crutch words. We'll talk about what words not to use. We'll talk about varying sentences, which is another one that I noticed that beginning writers, and maybe especially these devotional writers, some of whom are more new writers that I've been editing, um, they have kind of this cadence that's repeated. And instead of just
Hmm.
occasionally breaking it up, switch the sentence around, flip the content on each side of the comma, or you can make things kind of more interesting to read and kind of get a rhythm going. There's a lot, there are many things that we can do, but I think that um, by editing ourselves first and well, then when you do get an editor or you do start working with someone, they're past all the sort of obvious things, and then they can really help you with more, with deeper things like developing your thought more, in a more complex way, or just expanding a story. And so it saves the writer time. It also strengthens the writing, and it makes a much better impression, obviously, on either an acquiring editor or an editor that you've hired, if you've done this initial self-editing work.
Hmm, hmm. Very cool. Well, be looking forward to that, and you know, having you part of that conference.
Oh, me too. I'm excited.
So just to finish up, again, the title of Jen's new book is Sing, Wrestle, Spin. Why don't you show them the
Yep.
cover again? Yay.
Yes. Yep.
Prayers for Active Kids is the subtitle. And you can learn more at jennifergrant.com. So Jen, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks so much for
You bet.
sharing all of your wonderful work.
Oh, well, thank you, Brian.